Alright, this is section 3-8. This is slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. So the key idea from this chapter is going to be that we can determine if two lines are parallel or perpendicular by their slopes. And if we remember, that's slope is denoted by m. So first let's talk about parallel lines. So when two lines are parallel, their slopes are the same. So we can write this as a conditional statement. If two non-vertical lines are parallel, then their slopes are equal. We can also write it as, if the slopes of two distinct non-vertical lines are equal, then the lines are parallel. Keep in mind that distinct means that they are two separate non-vertical lines, they're not the same line. So two separate non-vertical lines are equal, then the lines are parallel. And finally, any two vertical lines are going to be parallel, and any two horizontal lines are parallel. So any two vertical lines would be parallel, and any two horizontal lines would be parallel. They won't ever cross each other. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have line L, and the equation for line L is y equals 3x plus 1. And I notice that this is in slope-intercept form, and so my slope here is going to be 3, so m equals 3. To find a line parallel to L, I'm going to find a line that has an equation whose slope is the same as L's. So a line with the slope that's the same as L, well, it's not going to be line M, because the slope is 2. So that's not going to work. But if I look at line N, I notice that I have a slope of 3, so line L is parallel to line N. So now we're going to work on writing equations of parallel lines. So let's look at an example. If we want to write an equation for a line parallel to y equals negative 3x minus 5 that contains the point negative 1 comma 8. So what we want to do is, we know that if a line is parallel, it's going to have the same slope. So we already know that m equals negative 3, because to be parallel, it has to have the same slope. Now all that we need to do is find b, our y-intercept. So the way we can find b is the same way that we would find b if we were solving for b from 2 points. So let's go ahead and take a look. We can plug in y1 and x1 into the equation y equals mx plus b, and then just solve for b. So y is going to be 8 equals, our m is 3, or negative 3, and then x is negative 1, and then plus b, because that's what we're looking for. So then we'll scoot this over, and we have 8 equals negative 3 times negative 1 is going to give me a positive 3, so positive 3 plus b. And then doing some quick algebra, subtract 3 from both sides, and I get that b equals 5. So now I have the ability to write my new equation. I know that m equals negative 3, b equals 5, so my new equation is going to be y equals negative 3x plus 5, and that is the equation of the line parallel to my original line that passes through the point negative 1 comma 8. Now let's talk about perpendicular lines. So when two lines are perpendicular, their slopes are opposite reciprocals. So opposites, for example, the opposite of A is going to be negative A. I just changed the sign on it. The opposite of negative B would be B. Again, I'm just changing the sign. A reciprocal is when we flip the fraction. So the reciprocal of the fraction A over B is going to be B over A. I flipped the fraction. Now let's say I'm dealing with a whole number. The reciprocal of 3 would be 1/3, or the reciprocal of 1/4 would be 4, because this is the same thing as 4 over 1. So then an opposite reciprocal means I'm going to change the sign and I'm going to flip the fraction. So let's say I have the fraction A over B. Then to make it opposite, I would do negative A over B, and then to make it opposite reciprocal, I would flip the fraction so it would become negative B over A. Now let's say I started with a negative fraction. Let's say I have negative c over d. Then to make it opposite, I would change my sign, so that's going to be positive c over d. And then to make it an opposite reciprocal, I would then flip that fraction. So I'm going to get positive d over c. So if my original fraction is a over b, the opposite reciprocal is negative b over a. If my original fraction is negative c over d, my opposite reciprocal is going to be positive d over c. So now let's talk about some properties of perpendicular lines. So if two non-vertical lines are perpendicular, then their slopes are opposite reciprocals, and that's what we just talked about. Also, if the slopes of two lines are opposite reciprocals, then the lines are perpendicular. And finally, any horizontal and vertical line are perpendicular, and we can think about that like this. If any line is horizontal and perpendicular, then any line are horizontal and vertical, then they are going to be perpendicular. So let's take a look at an example. Let's try to find a line that is perpendicular to line L. So I'm going to use the slope. So my slope is 3 over 2. I know that to find a line perpendicular to line L, I'm going to need to have a slope that's the opposite reciprocal. So the opposite of 3 over 2 is going to be negative 3 over 2. And then the reciprocal of that would be to make that negative 2 over 3. So I'm looking for an equation that has negative 2 over 3 as the slope. And I find that right here, so then I know that L is perpendicular to P. Now let's try writing equations of perpendicular lines. So let's say I need to find the equation of a line perpendicular to y equals 1/5 x plus 2, and that passes through the point 15 comma negative 4. So I know that I'm going to need a slope that's the opposite reciprocal. So my slope here is 1/5. And the opposite of that is going to be negative 1/5, and then the opposite reciprocal is going to be negative 5 over 1. Or I can just say that it's negative 5. Now that I've found my slope, I need to find my y-intercept. I need to find b. So I know that it passes through the point 15 comma negative 4. So this is my x1, and this is my y1. So I can go ahead and plug that into my equation, y equals mx plus b, and go ahead and solve for b. So y is negative 4 equals, m is negative 5, so negative 5 times x1 is 15, and then plus b. So now I just need to solve for b. So negative 5 times 15 is going to give me negative 75. Negative 4 equals negative 75 plus b. I'm going to add 75 to both sides. And I end up with, I'll write it over here, b equals 71. So now I have my m and my b. M equals negative 5 and b equals 71. So I can write out my equation, y equals negative 5x plus 71. This is the line that is perpendicular to my original line and passes through the point 15 comma negative 4.